Yena Tasmai Guruve Namaha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Ya Kundendu Tushara Hara Dhavala Ya Shubhra Vastravrita Ya Veena Varadanda Mandita Kara Ya Shweta Padmasana Ya Brahma Chita Shankara Prabhidivir Deve Sada Vandita Samam Patu Saraswati Bhagavati Buddhi Pradam Sharade Buddhi Pradam Sharade. So it's wonderful to be with all of you. I hope that you are all doing well. So if you have any questions, you can ask.
Swamiji, just a moment, please.
Okay, cool.
Kalmasha.
The translation is in a Google Meet, so we don't have to interrupt you.
Kalmasha, ты включилась?
Yeah.
Kalmasha.
My most strong experience with Guruji. Okay. So when I first met Guruji, I was 22 and he was 23. It was his first visit to South Africa. And he visited 3 times before we had an actual interaction. So I would attend darshans, and in the darshan, I never had the possibility or didn't even know that I could speak to him. So you would come and darshans would happen and I would attend. I never knew that I could stay until the end of a darshan. I never knew that it was possible to speak with him. I didn't know that he did that he spoke to people. So I would just attend, stay for some time, and then I would leave. So in the 3rd year of this process, the third set of visits that he was coming to South Africa, I was attending the darshan. It was on Mahashivaratri, and he was giving darshan, and lingams were coming out of his body at the same time. So if you can only imagine. And so then he was giving darshan, and there were about 1,000 people at the darshan. And so I went, it was my turn. So I approached him and I kneeled down in front of him. And I was taking darshan, and then he looked at me. He looked at me, and then he said my name. He said my name, and there was no way for him to know my name. Since there was a registration form always at every darshan, and I never filled in this registration form because I didn't want to be on any mailing list. I didn't want anyone to know who I am. So usually, and I left. So it happened that now it's over, the darshan is over. And When he was saying my name, he also wanted to make a conversation. So I thought, okay, there are so many people in this hall. It would be really rude of me if I stayed, having a conversation with him. So I left the conversation, and then I was still trying to figure out, how is it possible that he can know my name? Because it's not possible. So then my friend who I went with, um, and I had to leave. And so what happened to us is, it's very simple to go to this darshan venue. I mean, it's easy. I'd been there many times before. But on this night, it was impossible for us to get out. There was no traffic. It was just impossible to leave. So literally for 3 hours, we were going around and around in circles. It wasn't possible to leave. So eventually, after about 3 hours, we managed to get out of the neighborhood. And the next day, I was preparing lunch at home. And Guruji was giving vibhuti at that time. Later, I learned that this vibhuti was manifested from his feet. It had come out of his feet. So this vibhuti was on the counter in the kitchen, and the smell was filling the whole kitchen. It was stronger than the onion that I was cutting. And as I was doing this, I hear his voice in my right ear. So it was saying a name over and over. Not my name now, but I knew this name belongs to me. So again and again, the name was repeated in my right ear, but repeated in a very gentle voice, like 4 or 5 times he was saying. So then I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And I didn't think too much about it more. I finished the work that I was doing. And so the next day, when I was getting ready in the morning, I was sitting on the toilet. And this time I hear his voice, but with so much force, like it was punching into my ear. And it said the name and the surname together over and over and over in my ear. And then the immediate feeling was that I should contact the woman who was arranging his darshans. And these words came out of my mouth. I need to know who he is and how I can serve him. So this was the sudden reality, the sudden shift in reality. And that's one of the most powerful experiences that I've ever had with Guruji, because it was literally the beginning of my relationship with him, of this path with him. And so again, he didn't, how do I explain? He didn't make any other grand gesture. This was sufficient for me to want to know. It's like he put into me the longing to uncover who he is and who he is to me. And so this was really incredible. And it was from the initial recognition, like recognizing him in the very first darshan, then from the initial conversations that I had with him, which were just a few words, there was not much to say. And then from him showing me that there is nothing he doesn't know. There's nothing he doesn't know. So this was really interesting. Then the other question that was there is, has Guruji ever shown me his divine form? So I'll answer the question like this. He has shown me that his form is divine. The very form that he possesses is itself divine. So how I experienced this was, It was very recent. It was during the Just Love Festival. So I watched him a lot. In the beginning, I think I spent a lot of time just looking at him. And because I've read a lot of the scripture, which describes the form of the Lord Srimanarayana, what I was trying to do was to piece together for myself how that operates, right? How can it be that he is possessing this physical body? And so when you read in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the description of Krishna, right? It's right before the story of the disappearance, right? When he disappears in the presence of the gopis. So it describes how he runs into the forest and how he chooses the place where he's going to play his flute. And so this, I attended the class of Dr. Satyanarayana Das in Vrindavan. And so when he made this description of Krishna, right, not just the description of him physically, but also the description of him as a person. When he made this description, it was so not just beautiful, but the only person that I could see was Guruji. So everything from his fingers, his face, his eyes, his hair, his body, the way his gait, the way he moves, and the way he is, just like the way he is in his life with us. So I got to stay in his house in Shripitanilaya at this time when I was there. And so I would have the opportunity to like listen, right? I'm on the second floor. His apartment is above on the third floor. And then, so just to have the ability to know what the movements are, right? That now he's getting ready to do his exercise. Now and I spent just a day observing those movements without seeing him, without going up there to see him, to see how I can put the picture together inside of my head. And one day we were sitting together he was eating breakfast. I generally don't eat breakfast. So he was eating breakfast and I think I was drinking tea. And he was in a really good mood. It was like the third day before the end of Guru Purnima, of Just Love Festival. And so his mood was really happy. And he was laughing and he was joking with us. And so I was looking at him and suddenly he starts to cry. But not like, he became really quiet. And then his attention, so I'm watching him, but it's such a watching that I don't want him to see that I'm watching him, if you can understand what I mean. So I'm looking at him, but not like giving because I could see that he wasn't necessarily open to being looked at in that moment, right? So he was looking in the corner behind me, and then like really big tears were coming down his face. And so I was like, oh wow, something is going on. And then his mood changed slightly. And then some people came, his cousins came to say hello to him. They had just arrived from the UK. And so I got up and I was washing the dishes and I was thinking in my mind, I wonder what that was, right? And so I'm washing the dishes and he reciprocates my question because he wants to answer. So he pops his head into the kitchen and then he says, and he looks at me to say, ask what you want to ask. And then I asked him, what was that? That's all I said. He knew exactly what I was referring to. And then he says to me, that was Vittala. No, I asked what happened. Then he said, Vittala happened. So if you're asking me, I cannot say the differentiation, because it's like the what is then the difference between this form and his divine form? There isn't a difference, right? The difference is only my ability to see it or not see. And that goes and comes moment by moment, it goes and comes. So the reality is that every part of him, all of the time, is that divine. It's not just when he's in darshan or when he's, it's not a special switch that has to be switched on in him, but it is a switch that has to be switched on in us, where we can begin to perceive. And then what would be the point? It has to have a reason why he would do such a thing, why he would show such a thing. It's not just that he will randomly show. It is usually the fulfillment of something, or the continuation of something. So the reality of it is that he is continually that. He's never, there's no vacation from divinity. He doesn't take a vacation from from his divinity. So the beauty of it is like that the glimpses come. He gives the glimpses, and he gives and so often it's feelings. I was standing with him in his room one day, and I was looking at him. He was standing in front of me, and so I put my hand around his waist, and I pulled him in front of me, and I was looking at him, and I said to him, I see you. I see you. And then he asked me, what do you see? And I couldn't say anything more. It was just so real in that moment, who this person is, what he is, how he, like everything was so real in that moment. And there was nothing particular he was doing or saying, but he made it such that in that moment, the feeling, the perceivable feeling was there. And then once he started this 4-year story with me, so the story stretches over 4 years. And so we went in 2000 and I think 14 or 15. We traveled together to in a pilgrimage in Maharashtra. It was one of the first pilgrimages that I've done with him to Maharashtra. And so we're traveling and we reached this, of course, his great interest is in saints. So he wanted to go to the place of the saint called Akalkot Swami. So the area is called Akalkot. And since he had no name, he's either called Swami Samarth or Akalkot Swami. He sat in this place for about 14 years, right? And so it's one of the places that he sat in. So Akalkot Swami is interesting. He's almost 7 foot tall. He's really, really tall. And so when he puts his hand next to his hip when he's sitting, his shoulder touches his ear. So his arms were so long that they went past his knees, right? And he hardly ever smiled. He always had a really stern face on like a grumpy look on his face. So we go to this place and then I'm wondering like, wow, what a face this guy has. And so years pass. And so it's like 4 years after this, I'm in Sri Nilaya with him. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's me and 2 other people are sitting in Guruji's dining room, right? And so he's laying down on his sofa. So earlier that day in the morning, he had asked me to help Pankaj to do the Abhishekam of Giridhari, which he never asks to do such a thing. But when I go into the room, on the floor next to his altar, there is a picture of Akalkot Swami. So I think, oh my God, this guy, look at his face. It's such a grumpy face. And so I mentioned this to Pankaj, and he tells me something I can't remember. So then I go into we continue with our day. And so the exchange is over, like with me and Pankaj. Abhishekam is done. We leave and we do the day. And so at about 4 in the morning now, 3 o'clock, say 3:30, we're talking, and he's laying down on his sofa with his hand to his face like this. On his left side, he's laying. I'm sitting on the floor, and a friend of mine is sitting next to me. And then suddenly, his entire body becomes Akalkot Swami. His whole body changes. So he's laying there, and then he's speaking, and he gives the mental message, don't say anything. Don't say anything. So we continue talking, and this lasts for about 7 or 8 minutes. I can see him like this. And so it's over, and we leave. And I leave, and I go to my room. And then 4 years after this, I'm leading a pilgrimage in India for about 20 people. And it is the day that we are going to go to Alandi. Alandi is the Samadhi place of Saint Jnaneshwar. So we arrive in Alandi. This is in November, December was the pilgrimage. And it was one of the last places that we were visiting. So we would travel throughout Maharashtra, and grace, really, we managed to collect the relics, or 70 relics of saints, while we were on that. It was, the condition for him was, you can do this pilgrimage if you collect the relics of saints. Otherwise, I'm not letting you do it. So we collected the relic, and we reached out to Alandi. And then only to learn that it's the disappearance day of Saint Jnaneshwar. So there would be no way for us to enter the Samadhi place. So a few years before, we had done this trip with Guruji, and it again was a really impossible to reach, right? So when we arrived at the entrance of Alandi, the police stopped our bus. And then they said to us, you cannot go further with the bus. From here, you have to go by foot. And then it was clear, that there was back-to-back traffic on the road. And so when we asked, why is this? Then they said to us that the Indian government had arranged a mass wedding, free wedding. So anybody who is not able to afford to get married can, on this day, the Indian government provides the facility for people to get married further down that road. And so now we had to walk the 4 or 5 kilometers my shoes at home. So if you know India, there is no sidewalk, especially in small towns like this. And so the road was full of pieces of glass, full of thorns, it was really difficult to go. I was in such a bad mood when we reached to the Samadhi of Jnaneshwar that I was not really interested. I was like, can we just go home? This is it's too much. So we went into his Samadhi and took darshan and left. Or at least the bus had reached to the parking lot, so we could leave. So now, 4 years later, I'm back in the same place, and I'm leading this pilgrimage for these people. And then we are told, no, 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 your bus cannot enter. Luckily, I had my shoes. Your bus cannot enter. So now you have to walk even more. It's like 5 kilometers you have to walk. So I'm like, fine. And it was uncharacteristically hot for that time of the year. Usually it should be cool, but it was really hot. At the hottest, it reached to like 35 degrees, almost to 40, right? So we are going. And so I was wondering, but why? There is no traffic. There are no people. Why can't we go by bus? So when we reach the temple, there's like a square. Almost 1.5 million people were present there. Were present in Alandi. I have never seen so many people in such a small space before. I mean, in Kumbh Mela, it's a 40 square kilometer radius, and there were 47 million people there, but it's still a big area. So now I'm thinking, wow. So we go towards the temple, and we ask, we want to take darshan, and they point to the queue. So they tell us the queue is 30 kilometers long. If you want to wait, it will take some hours, they say. It will take some hours, but there is no way for you to take a shortcut. You have to go this way. Today is the special day, and everybody who wants to have darshan must do it in this way. So we're like, okay, it's not going to happen. Then we leave, we go to a bookshop, we buy some books, and then we try to get out of Alandi, but it was impossible because we didn't know how to get out. So then Abhirami was with me. So we were just standing literally and waiting in the sun. So eventually I said to her, let's just go that way. So we start walking. And there were two older people in the group. They were in their 70s. And so I thought, okay, we have to get to somewhere where we can rest and drink something. And so we do, we get to a place, we rest and we drink something. And then I can't say how I heard because the person wasn't speaking loudly. He was literally just mumbling. My back was faced to the road. And so this person was walking towards this place where we were sitting, and there were 4 shops next to it. So I saw him getting up on like a small platform and walking towards those shops. And so then I say to Vidya, who was the translator, Vidya, we have to get something from him. He's not an ordinary person. So she said, and then Sandeep, who was also there, runs quickly towards him and tries to get his attention. So he continues to walk as if Sandeep doesn't exist. He's just walking. And so Sandeep is walking backwards, trying to stop him. And then Vidya also tries, and the same. It's like she doesn't exist. So he goes to all the shops and he reaches to the last one. And then I know he's going to go down the stairs and then we will lose him in the crowd. So I go to where he's going to come down and I stop him. And then he stops and I give some dakshina to him. I think I gave him like 100 rupees. And he put it in his bag. He didn't even look at it. He put it in his bag and he took out enough biscuits, like cookies, for all of us. And so out of the same bag, bananas, cookies, everything came out. And he gave to all of us. Then I asked him, can I take your blessing? And he kicked off his shoes and he said, yes. Usually saints don't do this. They prefer that you don't bow down to them. So as I bowed down to him, his toes, the left big toe, was exactly the same as Guruji's. So I was like, and then the sensation coming from his body, like the presence coming from his body was so, I don't know, it was like Guruji, but times 10. There was no barrier to the sensation, to this magnetic love. There was no barrier. And so he stands there and then I'm looking at him and he's looking at me, and we start a conversation. So he was speaking a really old form of Marathi. It's more than 1,000 years old. So the translator was really struggling to translate. So I asked him, "Who are you? Right? What is your name?" And he says, "I am Digambar." So Digambar means the one that is not, you cannot cover him. He cannot be covered by clothing. And then he says to me, so I asked him, "Where do you come from?" So he answers, "I am everywhere and in everything. I am up, I am down, I am all around." And he looks at me and he says, "Between Akalkot Swami and me, there is no difference." And I flashed back to that moment with Guruji on the couch when his whole body became, and I'm like, what? And then he says, "If I eat an apple, he is satisfied." Okay, so he gives the clear message, right? And then he continues to talk. And so the translator is speaking to him, and suddenly he takes her hand in his hand, right? He holds her hand. And so the whole conversation is talking. So I have three aims. I am aiming for his hair. I see that he had a really cool necklace on his neck. It was a picture of the yagna that Ram had to do before fighting in Lanka. So does anybody know who was the Brahmin that performed the yagna for Ram? Who was the Brahmin that performed the yagna? Do you want to guess? Who was the Brahmin?
The one who gave guy the mantra. I forgot his name. The one who gave.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No.
It was
It's not him.
Ravana, no?
It was Ravana. Ravana was the Brahman. And so the Kshatriya cannot do the yagna without what? Who else has to be there?
Wife of Rama.
Had to be
Sita.
there.
Yeah.
So Sita had to be there.
Yeah.
So the picture he's wearing on his neck is that fire ceremony. So Ravana is doing the fire ceremony. Sita is sitting next to Ram. So can you imagine? He can, because Ravana is a Brahman, he cannot refuse the invitation. And he is doing the fire ceremony so that Ram can be successful at conquering him. So this is around his neck, and on his head is like a big, like a parcel of so many things. There are so many things inside. And so I look, he's wearing lots of malas, and there was one tulsi mala that he was wearing that has a small bell, like a decorative bell, is on the tulsi mala. So my eye is on tulsi mala, my eye is on his hair. And then Sandeep mentions we should ask him for his shoes, which were completely broken. So we speak, and he speaks about a lot of things. And so I ask him the question, for us who are on the spiritual path, what is the most important thing? And so he says, the only thing that is important is the divine name. And he looks at me and he says, if you don't have the name, I can give it to you right now. So he does this initiation into the name. And then the second thing he says to me, so then I ask all these questions, and by now I'm just crying because what is irradiating from his body is so powerful. the feeling is so incredible. And the way he is doing everything is like, by the end of our conversation, there was 600 people standing and watching us. So the conversation was going, and I asked him for his hair once, and he completely ignores. He continues to tell the story that he was telling, and then I asked him again twice, and I was about to ask him the third time when he removes this sack on his head, and he just pulls out one of the dreadlocks and he gives to me. And so conversation continues. He's talking about Mahabharat, and he's talking about the relationship between Krishna and Pandavas, and he's sharing things that I've never looked at it in that way. And so I'm looking at him, and he stops the story and he looks at me. He can feel the intention of my mind that I want to have this Tulsi Mala. And so then he takes his finger like this and he moves it through all the malas a few times. Then he stops at that mala and he removes it. And in exactly the same gesture that Guruji would do, he puts it around my neck. And it was such a incredible. And so then Sandeep says, why don't you ask him for his shoes? So now we have the hair, now we have this mala. Committing robbery to this man. We cannot take it unless we give something back to him. So then I say, okay, there's a shoe shop just behind us. I look at his feet, they are really big. Even though he was very short, his feet were really big. And so then I said to them, we can ask him for the shoes if we give him new shoes. So I sent the boys to the shop to take the two biggest pair of shoes they can find, and then to bring them and see which one will fit him. But none of the shoes could fit. By the size of his foot, and so anyway, he put his foot above the shoe. And I don't know which one changed. If the shoe changed size or his foot changed size. But he was looking like a naughty boy. And he put his foot in the shoe and it fit. And a short while later, he gave the feeling only that he wants to leave. So we took pranam and then he left. So then we noticed the entire weather changed. It became overcast. The breeze was blowing. The entire mood of everybody changed. We walked towards the bus. And as we were walking, I saw him one more time. He was crouching on the ground. So I went up to him and I hugged him one last time. And then he had 9 coins in his hand. So Guruji has a habit. If you buy shoes or soap or things like that for him, he will give a coin in return. So he was crouching and he was waiting. So I didn't buy the shoes, and like none of the people that were. The guy who bought the shoes was walking behind us. So then he comes closer, and again, he doesn't call him. He only gives the feeling that he should come to him. So he goes to him, and then he gives him some money, like the guy gives him some money, because it was such an incredible experience. And then he looks at him, and he was already holding the coins in his hand. So he just gives him the coins. And then he was gone. We couldn't see him anymore. Anyway, we get to the hotel later, and the pilgrims were having lunch. And as we're having lunch, Guruji calls. And his opening line is, "Oh, you had an amazing darshan